Integrated Care Board. This is a short meeting. It's just 1 hour with one agenda item. Now that has been quite deliberate because we've reshuffled the pattern of meetings, having delayed the last public meeting due to the morning period for Her Majesty. So just one item on this agenda, but a very significant one, which I'll introduce in a moment. I have formal apologies today from Angela Heller, from Sarah McClinton, and from Debbie Warren. I have Angela Brown with us, but she is held up on a telephone call outside as his client Jada will both join us hopefully in a few minutes. I don't think I have any other formal apologies. So at that point, could I just check on the declaration of interest? Is there anything anyone would wish to add to or to change on the declaration of interests? No? Thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting, actions and any matters arising. I will not do a page turn on the minutes, but can I just check, are people happy they are an accurate record of the previous meeting? There are no amendments suggested by anybody. Thank you very much. On the matters arising and the action points, I think we have 3 actions that all remain open. Are they all fixed for future meetings, Tosca?
That's correct, for the January meeting.
So they will all be picked up at the January meeting?
Except the last one, which is, so the first 2 are for January and the last one is for April, so plenty of time.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything anyone would want to put on any other business at the end of the meeting now? Anything that they feel should be discussed today that's not on the agenda? No? Well, we will have time at the end of the meeting for public questions, but I think in that case I will move straight on to the main item of business today, which is the delegation of responsibilities to the ICB for optometry, dental services and pharmaceutical services. Sarah's going to introduce this and take us through the paper, but I think the important thing for us to recognise here is this might look like a bit of formal process, but it is very important to us. These are services that reach deep into our community, have a potentially major impact on the health of our population, prevention of ill health. Bringing them into the ICB allows us to get greater control and to align those better with our primary and community services, and adds to our responsibility financially as well. In excess of 200 million, I think, coming into the ICBs. This is a major step change in potentially the ICB in moving it from its previous component parts from CCG. Sarah is going to take us through a presentation on this. There is an assumption that people, as always, will have read paper. But at the end of the day, what we will be looking for is for this board to accept the responsibility for delegation of these services to the South East London ICB, and to sort of note the process and approach that we will take from there on, having accepted. So, Sarah, at that point, over to you.
Thank you very much. And as the Chair has said, this discussion is really to support the recommendation of decision around this board accepting delegated responsibility, the commissioning of pharmacy, optometry and dental services. I'm going to call these pods from now on, just for brevity as I go through the presentation. Important to note as well that delegation has to be approved by NHS England, not just ICBs. So the paper tries to provide sufficient information to enable the board to make a consideration of the recommendation before it. So sets out national context and regional background, an overview of the work we've been doing with other London ICBs and NHS England London team to think about our future operating model, an overview of objectives, opportunities and implications, and then finally a consideration of some of the key risks and their mitigation. So just starting with background, and I think every board member is familiar with this, but from the 1st of April 2023, NHS England planned to delegate responsibility to all ICBs for pod services. That means essentially ICBs will take on the responsibility for delivering these NHS England pod functions for their population. The ICB therefore will have the operational and legal responsibility, that's the commissioning function, but importantly NHS England retains accountability to Parliament. Probably worth highlighting as well that some functions will be retained by NHS England under this delegation model. For example, national contract development and negotiations, professional regulation and national transformation. The paper summarises the scope of the delegation in terms of the number of contracts we will inherit and the financial, the associated budget. So you'll see there are 454 separate contracts and a budget of just over 205 million, and it is split differentially across those three pod services, with the majority sitting in dental. As I've said, we've been working with other ICBs and the London regional team to think about the best approaches to managing this delegation, particularly in the context of the fact that we have a small expert London team that currently undertakes the PA. And we've got to work collaboratively where it makes sense to do so going forward. In process terms, ICBs submitted a PDAF, that's a pre-delegation assessment framework back in September. That was a process designed really to test and provide assurance around our readiness as an ICB to take on the delegated functions, and that was in mid-October. Section 3 of the paper sets out some of the wider objectives, opportunities and implications for delegation of pods, and I think important considerations as we then think about these. So we've listed out some of the opportunities we think are associated with better joining up of care pathways, better focus on prevention and early detection, intervention, ability to tackle inequalities and also variation in access and a more holistic and integrated approach to care, including the ability to protect and build workforce resilience and improve our use of resources. We think there will be scope to strengthen links with the work we're doing around integrated neighbourhood teams and other key functions like population health management and public health, an ability to use data and intelligence to help us target our work and initiatives, and to help develop professional and clinical leadership in this area of provision. Also gives a couple of specific examples by pod to try to pull out some of these opportunities more fully. First, thinking about community pharmacy, really keen to build on a successful approach to vaccinations we've adopted as an ICB so and in that to cover blood pressure monitoring, and keen to kind of think more broadly about how we integrate prevention, long-term condition management services into these very offers. Equal opportunities around joining up weight management and smoking cessation and alcohol use with oral health promotion, but we know there are evidence-based links between poor dental health and broader physical health conditions. And lastly, and not chronically, we do have a really good minor eye condition service at the moment, but full of opportunities to think about how we expand that, build on it, and perhaps extend. So we've had a detailed discussion already about these opportunities. We'll need to give collective thoughts, I think, as to how we do that as we move. 5 of the paper summarises the work we've been doing with the other ICBs to develop our operating model post-delegation. As I said, we've been really focused on how we the expertise of the current designated London pod commissioning team, and we've reached clear conclusions conclusion that we actually need to keep a single team with consolidated that would operate across, importantly, on behalf of all 5 London ICBs. We've then considered what the most appropriate model might be for employing or hosting that team, with again an agreed approach that we would, in the first instance, retain NHS England employment of that team from the 1st of April 23, with a transition over to a host ICB. It's further agreed that when that happens, the North East London ICB will host the team on behalf of all 5 London ICBs, which importantly means we can meet that objective of keeping a single team consolidated across London. Paper seeks to summarise some of the work we've already undertaken across the 5 ICBs to think about the principles and how we will work together to enact this. And we have agreed that we will underpin that with an agreed MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding, that will describe the relationship between the host ICB and the 5 constituent ICBs, and the detail of how that delegation will be. A second set of MOUs that we agreed between ICBs and NHS England London region. Again, that will cover transitional arrangements around staffing that's just outlined, but also respective roles and responsibilities between NHS England and ICBs and our operating model. At the moment, are continuing to plan for delegation from the 1st of April. Key top priority is safe transition and transfer of these delegated functions from the 1st. Absolutely ensure we've embedded new requirements in our governance as we go forward, and we are very focused on that sort of safe landing before we then move on to consider and start taking forward some of the care pathway transformation opportunities are already summarised. A London steering group has been established to help oversee that alongside Frost equivalent local arrangements. And here is a focus outlined in the paper, but essentially agreeing a transition plan, developing the MOUs I've just talked about, working to make sure we're increasing understanding of ICBs around pod services, agreeing testing future governance, and then a range of technical bits of work, finance being key example. I've mentioned our focuses on the safe landing. The paper lists the areas where we're doing some sort of due diligence and further development. As I said, understanding the detail of current service, the contracts, legacy issue, financial allocation. Cited on. Lastly, the paper summarises delegation implications and then risk and mitigation. So, on the first, so implications for us as an ICB delegation. Really important need, I think, for collective understanding and plan, so we can make sure we have the resourcing required to deliver the functions effectively. That will need some capability around strategic, operational understanding of quality issues, managing patient safety, and then dovetailing out of governance into our wider ICB governance, that's at place. On the money, we need to make sure that we have a continuing ability to make payments and to bring the sort of accounting elements of delegation, but equally to understand the budgets that is being transferred, any unresolved. And to do that, we will be thinking about the upskilling of teams required. Then paper just talks briefly about some of the key transition risks, and then post delegational day 1 risks. So we've highlighted some of those around potential lack of information. Our ability to fully understand what we're inheriting is impaired, the full understanding of what's required of us, and potential loss of existing expertise around that central team. Paper, not only have we thought about some of these risks, but the transition plan aims to actively mitigate the risks. And then kind of equivalent risks for day 1, potential lack of agreed governance or lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities, insufficient understanding of pods, But I would draw out also managing demand as we're responsible for these services, and also expectations around the pace at which we might transform some of the pathways. And I think for me, that sort of managing expectations bit will be key, because we have to do the safe transfer first, make sure we understand the opportunities around pathway improvement or improved access. These recommendations, which are threefold: to accept the delegated functions for pharmacy, optometry and dental services from NHS England on the 1st of April 23. Then that NHS England agree that proposal. We're also asking you in the detail of the paper to note and endorse the approach we've taken to date on timescales and proposed operating model, and note and accept the implications of delegation. The wider work I've just talked about for delegation. I hope I helped you summary of a very long paper.
Thank you very much. So now, before we get into asking people to respond on the particular points, can we just explore this probably in, I think, sort of 2 or 3 chunks? And first of all, any questions or thoughts people have around the opportunities side of this? Because the idea is we're doing this for a purpose. We're not just accepting something because it's there. So just thoughts about the opportunities, and particularly where we should be focusing our attention in terms of transformation side of this. And secondly, then maybe some view on the risks, how people see the risks, and within that, I would take Sarah's point, particularly about expectations on this as well. But yeah, how quickly we can deliver on the transformation, and then I think the sort of within that a general steer on this balance between the safe landing, which is what the NHS always tends to focus on in these things, and the transformative side of this. Yeah, where on that risk do we sort of feel we should be about pushing for change quite quickly, as opposed to accepting that we need to manage significant risks first of all. Then, sorry, finally, maybe just about the operating model side, any clarification of the operating model. So first of all, on the opportunity side, Clive.
Yeah, I know you want to talk about it separately, but for me, there's a key bit here that links them together. I'm very supportive of it, because I can see the transformation opportunity, and as you say, there has to be a reason for doing it, and that is the reason for doing it. But I'm still trying to get a bit more clarity over is whether or not the process, both in terms of this transitional year and the hosting by one ICB, is going to, in many respects, hamper transformation and make us much more along the spectrum of let's just keep it all ticking along in a very safe way, as opposed to doing something significantly transformational, focused on what's right for South East London. And because for me, that's the purpose of doing it. If, however, we create a process or structure that prevents that, I'm not supportive, as I probably would be.
Okay, so although I did say separate, I mean, to the extent the operating model is a way of minimising risk, but also potentially then hampering transformation. I guess that's the question on this. Does the operating model get in the way of that transformation? So I'm going to take Paul, I'm going to take Iffy, I'm going to take David, and I will wait for John T and George first. Let me just take those 3, because otherwise it might be difficult. So, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to Sarah and the team for all the hard work on this. I know it's been a significant endeavour and a really helpful paper. So on the opportunities side, Richard, I think they're all good opportunities for us in truth. But I must be honest, I'm particularly excited about pharmacy stuff, because I think for our population, South East London, I mean, lots of people do visit their citizen GPs, but we know that not everybody in South East London will necessarily have do that very often. And I think the pharmacy is a much more general offer to the community that gives us a real opportunity to reach into community. The opportunity is exciting given who we are. And on the risks, it was really a process point, if that's okay, a process question. So, I'm supportive of the direction and the decision we're being asked to make today. But I'm conscious as well that most of the due diligence is still to come on the finance, on the operating model, on the MOUs. So just wanted to check, Chair and colleagues, how, if things emerge in the due diligence that are of concern, not necessarily a showstopper, but of concern, how do we handle that in governance terms? And on the kind of safety versus transformation, I mean, the point of us doing this for us is transformation, I think. So I'm really keen we get to the transformation piece as soon as we feel able, really. So I definitely encourage the case. And perhaps we might want to think separately about the three different opportunities and decide which ones we want to pursue earliest.
No, to that, I wasn't ignoring you, I was doing that. Oh. So Iffy first, then David, then I'll do another round. I've got you, Stuart, in my eye as well.
Paul has touched on one of the critical things I wanted to raise, but on the opportunity, I think it's the right thing to do. But I was a bit more concerned about due diligence. We're confident with nails. We have a good understanding of what's in the envelope, what's the contract details, etc. We then have a big, both in terms of our also manage some of the risks, particularly rising demand as well as expectations, to get a sense from Sarah about where we've got to with that, and also how would we know if something else comes through, even if we approve this today, if we approve the direction of travel today.
Okay, thank you. And can I just add to that, Sarah, just while you're thinking as well? I think there's a point, Paul, made as well about the differential opportunity and risk across each of these three different things, because we're looking at them as a group of three, but they're clearly very different as well. So I think it's David, then I'm going to come back to you, Sarah, and then come to Stuart, John T, Toby and George. Oh, and Kerry as well. But David.
Yeah, you've got 100.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't looking to my right. Apologies, Tosca. We take David first, I'll take you, Tosca, and then I'll go on to the rest.
So, thank you, and just building on what people have said on this, the transformation we talked for years about is in pharmacy. I don't know what the size of this team is. The team that is there. So you've got special
25
people, right? And I guess that's the key then of how we're going to use some of that for local transformation, because I guess the transformation has probably been more ticking over previously at NHSE, and so how do we do some of that? And the risk, I guess, if you just leave it as that, it can just carry on as that. So again, just the clear, get some of that finished locally.
Right, I'm going to take Tosca, then I'm going to give you an opportunity to come back on a few of these, otherwise there'll be too many for you.
Thank you, sir. I think there's a lot of good work that has gone into this work. Just on the transition risk, because it's not explicit in the paper, can I just confirm that as well as a mismatch between expectations and providers, the public, around the improvements that we've discussed, it also includes improvement relating to access and reducing health inequalities.
Okay, now, I'll try and pull that together for you. So I'm sure you've written them all down because you're a bit more thinking time. The balance between transformation and the sort of reducing risk, and that was both Clive's and I think also to some extent David Bradley's as well, that you have a team at the moment that is focused on transactions, not on transformation, the central team, and keeping that model, will that minimise the opportunity for transformation? That's the first one. At the point on due diligence about how do we come back in terms of governance arrangements if when you do the due diligence things don't look as good as you thought they were. The question of some differential opportunity and risk maybe across the three different elements of this, and the expectations risk, I guess, about both demand and health inequalities issues.
Could I say, Chair, it's Sir Ray 124, and some colleagues, I mean, there's a number of people around this table who are also well versed in these opportunities.
So go on, Andrew, as much as you like.
Well, I'll have a go and then we can fill all my gaps among with others. So I think Clive and David, your questions around process and transition hosting, whether it hampers transformation. I think I'd rather seen it in the opposite terms. So I think the defence team, as you've said, David, has been predominantly focused on the more transactional contracting side of business. It's really vital that continues, and I think our view is it's best to continue as a consolidated function with that expertise in a single place. That then frees up ICB teams to really think about that transformation. To me, the trick is ways of working then between those two and contracting functions. We need to make sure we understand as ICBs the contractual opportunities and ensure that central team help enable us to secure the transformation opportunities we've talked about through contracts. And I think we'll need their expertise. So I actually think it should be a good blend. We make sure that we have responsive teams. Equally, we're giving the information available at those enabling contracts to be secure. In terms of due diligence and how we'd handle that in governance terms. So I think we have a rapidly developing better understanding of the services and the detail sort of quality issues, legacy issues. Clearly, we need to keep doing that, and we'll keep doing it as we go along. And I think a series of masterclasses have already taken place to make sure that teams are able to generate a much better understanding. I mean, I think in terms of how we handle in governance terms, I think we need to be really clear and explicit about any concerns we have or any risks via our usual processes, but absolutely commitment here to make sure we're all fully involved in understanding and putting our collective heads together around mitigations and or implications of those that can't be. And I think really importantly, we need to make sure in our joint dialogue with NHS England, we have a joint understanding of those risks and a joint recognition of those risks, and our MOUs reflect expectations around delivery or addressing those risks which will be existing. So we've set clear sort of parameters around delivery expectations as ICB's improvement. In terms of differential opportunity and risk, I think there are differential opportunities. Personally, I'm quite excited about all three. I think opportunity. I think community pharmacies and the work we've done over the pandemic definitely shows there's a very local we can make that will be responsive, that can encompass a broad range of things. I think on dental, we're a massive opportunity again around oral health, isn't about children. So equally, I think there are all, of course, we can't do is do it. We'll need, I think, going back to Foster's point, to think about inequalities and biggest impact from a population perspective, and what is the order we might tackle some of these. Yes, I think absolutely. I did say, I think under the opportunities that there are access and inequalities opportunities in terms of some of the key opportunities, improving access, joining up pathways and reducing.
Thank you very much. I will bring you in a few minutes, Andrew, but I'll take my gaggle of doctors first of all. So John T, George and Toby. And then if we come to our place leads, we've got Stuart and Kerry. I think, does that cover everybody who has put their hands up? Am I missing anybody? No? Right, John, to you first.
So I mean, in many ways, actually, Sarah's already touched on this, and I think Clive captured it well, and I suppose it's partly just to reassure everyone that this has been an ongoing discussion that we've been having as this has progressed, which is how do we ensure that we can create the conditions for transformation, but I just think it's quite important also to recognise. Equally, I think we have already started to undertake quite significant transformation. If you look at the vaccination programme, the work we've been doing in community pharmacy, so I don't think transformation is absolutely dependent on this in terms of developing our local neighbourhood teams either. But I do think that we are going to need to consider, as we progress, how we build the capability locally to essentially interface with that contracting team, particularly I suspect in our local care partnerships, because having quite a deep understanding of how certain delivery is going to be critical. And I guess the reason I wanted to flag that, and maybe it's a bit more comment than certainly the question, Sarah, is that in the same way we have seen with general practice, other primary care services also have significant variation between both their capacity and capability and the quality of care they deliver. So we are going to also need to think about how we establish quality improvement processes. So yes, transformation for people who are attending their pharmacists, for example. And I do think, whilst I actually recognise the opportunity around pharmacy, actually dental services are incredibly important. The pressures that we're experiencing in our own scheduled care pathway at the moment is undoubtedly down to inadequate access around dental care. So I suppose it's just to emphasise the opportunity to absolutely acknowledge the challenge around transformation, but I think we have to start somewhere, because to get that alignment between the contractual mechanism and our aspirations within our local care partnerships to deliver integrated neighbourhood teams is going to be key. But I've no doubt it means we're also going to need to develop a slightly different kind of muscle locally within boroughs as well to support some of the transformation.
Thank you, George. George.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of attending Pod's Masters last year yesterday.
Sorry, Darren, George.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And it was particularly interesting around the differential, I think.
Yeah.
So I think we were being honest about this. We would probably take community pharmacy in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But there does seem some lack of flexibilities and things around dental and optometry, being brutally honest, and that speaks more to a 5-year progression in developing that area. I guess the bit that worries me most is probably about workforce around the dental community and leadership across all the specialities. So workforce in a way that units of dental activity, I think, fully recognised for long periods of time, not up to scratch to where they should be, and especially after the pandemic, the acuity so much those units of dental activity aren't anywhere near what they should be for the caseload. So there will be an expectation, I think that's already been imposed by some of the commissioning already, that we kind of support that. Because otherwise we will just have dentists that go all of their NHS work, so the workforce the capacity will be diminished. So I guess for me, it's a recognition in the due diligence that follows that we speak to leadership and workforce being critical parts of things that we have to add in, because I think those things are. And also we have to be sort of realistic about the transformative capabilities that we have. I think we know that some of certainly around dental 5+5 year contracts. So we need to be kind of careful around that. So I think generally I agree with Iffy for the opportunity, and we have to take. But I'm more interested in what we do in the year 24-25, try and extract from a very well versed, and I think even the chair that they were very respectable people who were speaking on that Pod's Masterclass. That bit and manage our own expectations around the transformative capabilities.
Clarity coming from that, sir, before I forget, bring Toby in. Do these three come as a package, so you can't take one without the others?
They will come together.
You're all come together. Okay. Toby.
Yeah, well, transformative opportunities here, I think, clearly significant opportunities to separate lateral population centre of access and making every contact count. comment in the paper that there's a, as you might expect, a correlation between poor dentition in children and health. So there's a question. I do share Clive's sort of anxiety about the ability to deliver transformation for this but I think equally there are opportunities to share learning across all of London. So I think there are opportunities as well as challenges there. A particular question, just to ask how much we know about quality of access and uptake of dental services.
All that question to come back to, I don't know whether you're the best person, Sarah, or someone else, but I'll be told that thing to say. This is Stuart. Sharon.
Yeah, thanks. It feels like there's, as Steve commented, a lot of opportunity wrapped up in a load of risk. So I'm lacking the risk to get the opportunity. But people were talking about the health inequalities. I think there's the opportunity here clearly is about our ability to affect those health inequalities, and these feel like services that can really support us around that. Something about that transformation being coherent with, for instance, Fuller, actually understanding interdependencies. The question I've got really is around messaging. So there's already something paper alerting us to the fact that we may get more inquiries than we can cope with. I think about this in terms of access to general practice. As soon as it comes on the political radar, I'm very much expecting that there will be a massive increase in the number of inquiries about why people can't get an NHS dentist. How we message and manage expectations, I don't know that's the role of the ICP in considering this strategically too, but certainly in terms of political messaging.
Yeah, so a couple of bits for me really. It's been a few years since I've been close to this, but there is something, and I think John, you were alluding to us having enough capacity to be an intelligent customer. Really, so we need enough knowledge and understanding, because in actual fact, we've always been able to add to these contracts, even through existing teams. That's not meaning we can do that. It's just a different group of people we need to do it through. So that was the first thing. The transformation, obviously, just with general practice, there's an awful lot to be happening at the neighbourhood level, particularly, but actually also, I think the thing for us to think about what are the fundamental changes we'd like to see right across South East London, and to come together around that. But I just wanted to note the role of public health in this, because I think about where pharmacy has a huge impact, whether it's smoking cessation services or vaccination, public health element is huge, the opportunity on optometry for that one. So that, and I also just wanted just two other things. One is to pick up Jonty's point again, the quality variation in my experience the previous life was huge. And will become, as it comes closer to us, we can't just say that's NHS England, which I think is what CCG would have been doing previously, which then brings us into the expectation about investing further money in the core contracts to address health inequality. As it comes closer, it's going to become not something that sits elsewhere, but the NHS.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kelly. Now, there are no other hands up. I'm going to try and bring those together again for you, Sarah, but you may want to come in as well. Andrew, as you have been involved in this, I think, in past lives as well. So there's a very specific question from Toby about what we know about health inequalities and access to dentistry specifically. So what's our understanding of that? Stuart's point about the messaging, which I think is really important, because once we take on this responsibility, I think there will be an assumption from our populations and from our political leaders that, well, actually, you're going to sort out dental access now overnight. So, yeah, how do we handle that? Maybe something from Andrew to join in with your team. It's a question of where this transformation happens as well. I'm a bit sort of unclear in my own mind still about what's done at the local level and what's done across ICB and what our thoughts are on that. Well, public health, how this links through with our public health colleagues, and then this very specific issue of quality variation, which is the other side of the messaging. The messaging is about, partly about access, but actually also about quality of provision as well, when that comes back to us Now, and where we feel we are understanding, I guess, that quality variation stuff. So I know there's a few thoughts you'd like to give on that, Sarah, and then if I hand back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, so I think in terms of dental access and inequalities, I think we know there is a problem at both sort of general access, but also pandemic general dental practice over periods of the pandemic. I can't actually answer here because I don't have the information in front of me or actually know the level of detail we have, what that looks like by geography or by population cohort. I think that's definitely something we all want to understand as we sort of do the due diligence going forward. In terms of workforce and George's comments, I mean, I think, or the hope is, I think, embedding within an ICB enhances our ability to sort of protect and develop a more resilient workforce. I think teams developing professional and clinical leadership as part of our kind of ongoing ICB processes, but also I think there will be workforce opportunities if we think about shared roles or end-to-end pathways as well. So I think probably more opportunities around workforce than I wrote mine down in a slightly different order. In terms of comms and messaging, I agree, Stuart, absolutely important. We need to work with a range of wider partners, local authorities being absolutely key in that. They will hear a lot about access issues, so we do need to get that joined up in terms of sharing that understanding of what we're doing and shared approaches to comms and engagement. As we work through opportunities, those inequalities or population health points would be a no-brainer not to work with public health and wider and bring in population health management approaches to what we're doing. Transformation opportunities, I think as with everything, it's not a simple answer, is it? It's got to be a blend of very local, and I think the advantage community models like community pharmacy give us is it supports hyper-local delivery, albeit it might be that you have differentiated focus depending on population need or so we will want to define and do some things at scale, some things at place level, some things locally. I guess the trick is a coherent model. And quality variation, I think a bit like access variation. Understanding, addressing variation will be a key kind of issue here, but part of due diligence will help us understand variation as well as variation and accessibility approaches. Again, I think we've got lots of experience around this with primary care, other contractors, so we would want to
Thank you, Sarah. Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't going to attempt to answer the question Sarah's done a really good job. Just some thoughts on future stuff and then maybe a bit of a look back, just on the look back and the sort of what happens if you don't have delegation. So, Andrew Ayres, particularly on this, I think Lambeth and Southwark combined, maybe with Lewisham in, had this many staff just for those three boroughs, if I go back to PCT days. And the sort of criticism, particularly about the 26 members of staff for the centre, are not representing a transformation capacity, or otherwise they are making sure there are safe, effective and efficient contracts let. So I don't think we should kid ourselves that continues unless we do something about it. There isn't a plan that I'm aware of to invest in that specifically. I've been involved in local commissioning of one kind or another in primary care in South London for the last 12, 13 years. There hasn't been a local dialogue I'm aware of on some of these issues. So just the sheer fact of owning it and us giving it a local overview alongside the other services on the pathway, I think is a huge advantage. Whether that's an opportunity or not, it's just a factual thing. I think we will have the opportunity to scrutinise that alongside other services and so we can do. Councils, unless Stuart's brothers correct me, you're still looking at pharmaceutical needs assessments. I used to sit on panels that assess market entrance. So they're not just the opportunity to talk about transformation, otherwise it's straightforward. Should it be there or should it be somewhere else? And we used to take decisions that said if we put it there, a community that can really do it won't get it over here. So do we want to do that? I haven't been involved in one of those for over a decade. I'd like to be re-involved in that type of thing. So there are, and then just some reality check. Honestly, I don't have a huge transformation resource now or anything else. and we're talking about what the transformation resource of this will be. So we're going to have to get into a discussion about how do we resource transformation generally, and I would like these services to be in the mix of that. And I would say we've got more transformation resources than we have for these areas, but that's still at a premium, and we need to work on it. I do think in delegation we will have a future discussion about not just investment in human activities, but investment in the team that goes around making this work. I think it's just that. I didn't join the masterclass, so I'm definitely out of date, but I think the big differential is starting point for some of these services, but also contractual rigidity. So I think there is a little bit here about saying what can one do, and I think one of the reasons that community pharmacy feels so attractive is there's huge innovation. People have worked hard on contractual change otherwise, and so that's a real driver. Can we apply that to other areas? I suggest we can do it if we're involved in it. So I think that's probably all I would say, Chair, other than I am excited about having these. I think they offer different opportunities, and I think and they're a package, absolutely. So there's no cherry picking, George. Yeah.
Okay, now I am going to ask people formally the questions we had in the paper, and then I will try and summarise some things that we need to think about going forward. So first of all, I get the general view that although there is a bit of concern about getting caught in some rigidity of the current system, the people believe we should take the opportunity to take on these delegations. Okay, so we have agreement on that. I think people have noted process and approach. I think there's 2 or 3 things that I think going forward that we just need to make sure we keep a proper sight of and bring back to this board through our existing structures. One is clearly the due diligence point that was made by Paul early on, that as you go through the due diligence, if stuff comes up, there needs to be a formal way of coming back to this board to allow it to revisit the decision we've just made if that is necessary at any point. I think the second is, as we go through this process of really trying to identify what the key opportunities are and focus on a handful of those that we really want to progress with vigour rather than just leave things as they were or try and do everything. Will that, where in our committee structure, I guess, will that go through to come back here? Because I think it's important this board sees those transformation opportunities and prioritises those as a board. I think the third thing that should come back to the board, Sarah, is something on the sort of state of the nation on this as we go into taking on responsibility. So Toby's point on sort of what are the inequalities issues, particularly on dentistry. I think that's the one people are particularly concerned on this. And also that's the picture on access and quality, so we can see what that looks like. Fourth point, I think just to discuss with Ranjit how the messaging on all of this works, so we just get that right. And then the fifth thing is on the transformation piece, having prioritised, well, how do we resource and what do we do between local places and ICB? So I think, unless there's anything I've missed there, I was interested, particularly from Andrew's comment at the end. In a sense, actually having the contracts and the commission doesn't really change an awful lot in many ways, because the contracts are quite rigid on this, and they are now negotiated. But it gives you a sense of ownership of these things that I probably think we've lost over the last 10 years. So they gives that a sense of ownership, which makes you want to focus on the transformation differently. So although it may seem a bit mechanistic, I think there is something. Yeah. So thank you very much for that. So I know this is not your specialist. You have a team of people that deals with this, but I think you do very well on it. And thank you very much to colleagues for your contributions on that. I think that was a really useful, very helpful discussion. So at that point, if there's no other business, I will go to public questions. So can I just check there are no items of any other business that anyone. Okay, now this is, as people know, a board meeting held in public, not a public board meeting. So we generally would focus on questions that are related to the agenda that we have just covered. Having said that, I do recognise that for various reasons, this has been quite a sort of narrow agenda in a short meeting today. So I'm willing to sort of open this up a bit and go a bit beyond the agenda itself. We have 3 written questions put to us. Now, I don't know whether any of our 3 members of the public are people who put written questions in. I've got 3 shakes of heads, so that's okay. So, but what we will do is go through the written questions. They are in the agenda pack, but I think it's worth us saying a little bit about them. First one was from a gentleman who worked for the British Red Cross Home from Hospital Service, particularly around discharge and resettlement of vulnerable adults, and in particular the homeless. And whilst being very supportive of what was happening in South East London, was asking if any of the government's £500 million adult social care discharge funds intended to relieve pressure on hospitals would be used to fund projects aimed at facilitating early and safer discharge of homeless inpatients. And I think I was going to pass back to you again, Matt or Sarah.
Yes, I mean, the answer to the question in writing does just try to give a bit of a summary of how we're taking forward work across our 6 with homeless teams, to make sure we've got clear pathways and processes to support people who are homeless, and for example, temporary accommodation, hostel places, step down facilities, and in addition, a range of advice from local authorities, including on cost of living crisis. We already have a project that started in January of 22 across South East London, looking particularly at safe and effective discharge of homeless people or people at risk of homelessness from our acute hospitals. So Brits and Answer gives just a bit of background around that, which involves expanding specialist teams and provision of specialist homeless workers, provision of additional short-term accommodation in the community, and resettlement supports. That's a project that's ongoing across beyond the 500 million discharge support. I think we would be absolutely around early and safer discharge for homeless inpatients. Really important though to note we haven't yet received any confirmation around the funding or equally any understanding of associated guidance. So 1, we do need to receive the funding to consider its application, and 2, to understand the parameters around risk for. We would have no exclusions from population type groups we would consider.
Thank you, Sarah. Second question was from a Southwark resident. Thanks, 2 questions. First one, and I will read it out in full, was meeting on 16th November. Given current challenges facing the NHS, I am rather surprised at the very limited timescale from November meeting. With the government's mini-max economic statement imminent, nurses planning industrial action, the ICS strategy imminent, continued NHS backlog, etc. Also feels like a rather cursory engagement with the public. Is this the approach we can expect in the future from the ICB? So I'll just give a couple of comments on that. I mean, this meeting is an odd one. We had to shift the cycle of meetings because of the morning period. So we had a full board meeting in October, and the normal cycle would then take us into a 2-month period. The next full meeting will now be in January. Now, that doesn't mean that all of these things are not being discussed continually all over the ICBs. These are things that we and all our institutions are focused on. And it also doesn't mean this is the only piece of the ICB, this is the only bit of ICB public engagement. Each of our places meeting our public, meeting public, our institutions meeting public. So there is lots of other opportunity for public engagement beyond this meeting itself. On specifics within there about the government's economic statement, clearly the autumn statement is happening tomorrow, so it's very difficult to talk about any impact of that at the moment because we frankly don't know what it is. And on the question of the ICS strategy being imminent, that is being discussed in a public meeting next week at the Integrated Care Partnership. So the papers for that, I believe, go out tomorrow. today, Perception Act will go out today, so there will be still chance for people to engage on that strategy process. Second question from the Southwark resident was financial position. Can you provide an update on the current financial position in the context of rising inflation and need to make efficiencies, etc.? Well, I think we've given a reference to papers from the October board, but what I can say is that overall the financial position this year is challenging, but we believe is manageable. We have a small deficit at this point in the year, but not one that is unmanageable within the numbers that we have, the financial numbers we have in South East London. Next year looks significantly more challenging, but again, until we see the autumn statement, it's very difficult to say anything more about that. I don't know whether, Mike, there's anything else in the financial position you would add to that? No? No? Okay, thank you. Third question was two questions. One related to engagement with the South East population on NHS plans report on the Guardian website, patient medical records to be incorporated in the new data platform. It is disturbing the NHS is apparently not concerned about patient consent. Will you discuss this proposal at all in public at future meetings? And then a second point on the October board, is the ICS strategy close to completion, which I think I've just answered. So on the issue about patient medical records and the Guardian report, John, is there anything you could say about that to us?
Yeah. Well, so I suppose there's a couple of things. The first is that the Guardian reports about a national initiative that's been led by NHS England to develop a federated data platform. And so in the written response, we had also directed the questionnaire to connect with NHS England to find out a little bit more. To the best of my knowledge, at this moment, that proposal has not been progressed and no decision has been made in particular about who will potentially be providing that data platform, which I know is one of the focuses within the Guardian article that they're alluding to. At the moment, I'm quite clear that no decision has been made on that. I suppose I did just want to be very reassuring about the work that we've done to involve local people in thinking about the way in which they would expect us to make decisions in relation to their personal data. So I think we've done actually pretty incredible work regionally to understand what citizens in London expect us to do with their data, as well as locally. We've taken the principles from that and we have developed governance that reflect people's expectations about the way we use their data. Importantly, within that governance, we also continue to have representation, both from Health Watch and local residents at South East London through our data usage committee. And then regionally, they've established an independent advisory group on information sharing. That also has South East London representation from Health Watch and the local residents sitting on it. So I think at every stage, we've absolutely tried to ensure we've understood what people expect, and that's been translated into our governance processes. I would also say, of course, that that's an ongoing conversation because almost every week we come to understand different potential uses of data. So it's important we continue to have that conversation with the public. And that is also something that people may well be aware. We are doing some work at regional level to think about some of the research capability we need. And as part of that, there will be a third process of involving the public in that conversation. Everything that we've done, we've included a bit more detail in the written response. And I suppose it's partly to reassure the questioner that that is now very much integral to the way in which we're governing data usage in South East London.
Thank you very much, John. Now, are there any questions from the members of the public that are sat on the back seat? Gentlemen, right at the far end.
Thank you very much. Listening to the comments, also the delegation, you have your comments about rigidity around contracts. Is there a conversation with NHS England about the level of input you have
international negotiated contracts, in the short term in particular, through the transition process, so that you can kind of start to evolve what's happening, particularly perhaps once you decide what your priority is.
Okay, can I, I'm gonna, rather than try to answer that myself straight away, I'm probably going to turn to either Sarah or to Andrew. And that looks like from Sarah's face, I'm turning to Andrew. First of all, delegated upwards to the Chief Executive on this. The only thing I'd say is that there is a sort of a cycle to these national contracts of when they're negotiated. So I have not heard anything about some changes in the short term that you mentioned on the contracts. But Andrew, have you any other?
One slight failing here. So there are, I think the paper references it, and if not, very happy to make clear, there are some ICBs that took delegation early. They took it in the year we're in, so had it for a year. And what I can commit to do is find out whether they have found they are more or less able to influence national contracts than they were without delegation that we are now. I'm with the chair. I'm not aware of a structure that allows that at the moment. I'm absolutely, my expectation, and NHS England's expectation, is that through this delegation we have the opportunity to be more directly involved in those conversations and how they work. Not to ask a question for you, but you might reasonably ask, well, how has that worked with other delegations for general practice or otherwise? And I would say there, I'm not sure we've found a good way of coherently adding into that contractual discussion. I think this is our opportunity as an ICB and the board, a new organisation to do that. The Chief Executive part of the reason for doing this is to have a good go at that. So I don't think the correct answer today, no, I don't believe so. I will find out what colleagues in other parts of the country are experiencing and have to put that in.
And we've put that on the website on the record. So Stuart, do you want to comment on that as well?
Just that analogy with 2B contracts and whether future funding, any additional funding might have a different contractual route, which is any intelligence that that's likely or international.
Nobody's any better than mine on this, but I think the ability to do that is there. I think it's my ownership point. So I'm not sure that we attend to some of the flexibility and opportunities that are there with these contracts where they are not located in a local discussion. And these are not characters made reference to it slightly earlier, but I think there are flexibilities now that we're making use of. So.
Okay, any more questions from the back of the room? Yes, wants to jump on the front.
So my name is Ross Charles. I've been living in the area about 22 years, and I live at Denmark Hill. I'm not sure so much whether it's a question or an observation. So thanks very much for a really thorough review of the transition of the services. It would strike me listening to some of the commentary today that just in oversimplistically in terms of the stack ranking, that community pharmacy seemed to be the area which was perhaps the most receptive to some of the adapt and adoption and transformation that we're talking about. And therefore, how does that get factored into the wider set of determinants around inequality, health, access, when you're having to inherit some of the contractual and some of the rigidity around that, at the same time seemingly having some of the flexibility with community pharmacy? How do you square those two things up, having a lack of transformation and capacity to do that? How much is it about providing direction and toolkits and self-management as opposed to you having to guide that?
So I think there's probably quite a long answer to that would be, it will be different approaches, but there is one also about us actually, what we've got to do is try and create some transformation capacity within our system as well to do things. And the fact we haven't got it at the moment shouldn't mean we don't have it in the future. There is something about what can we create and carve out from doing less value-added activities. Always really easy thing for a chair to say, a lot more difficult for executives to deliver, and I realise that. And I think there is, and this is one thing that why I think we should come back to this on what are our transformation priorities in each area. It feels to me it is very different between pharmacy, where I think people know there's a lot of opportunities and are quite well practiced at trying to get those opportunities out. So I think the working with pharmacy has been, frankly, a lot better in delivering those opportunities, as opposed to something like dentistry, where it feels there's a lot more risk and we're probably a lot more off the pace. And what we got to think about is where do we focus our effort? Do we just do it on the things that maybe look quite easy, or on some of the things that are a lot tougher but could deliver a lot? But Andrew, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think where we've been able to make progress this year, excuse me, on community pharmacy, is where we're around the single topic of vaccination, where we have a transformation resource. So rather than thinking of it as a single resource for a provider, this was a resource for a, if you like, an intervention across a range of providers, hospitals, general practice, community pharmacy, and actually the work with community pharmacy, prompted by that project, has allowed us to make them, I think, the second biggest vaccinators in South East London. So that's using our own resources, our own commissioning resources and our own transformation resources. So it is possible to do that, but it's probably where we've got a really clear priority, a clear opportunity to do so. This gives us an opportunity to look much broader than single topic issues like vaccination.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions and comments. At that point, I will call this meeting to a close, and I think if I give people 10 minutes break before we move on to the private seminar. But thank you for your time, and thank you for your questions.